Growing up, my neighborhood wasn't exactly the nicest place. It was one of those forgotten corners of the world, where people didn't move because they wanted to, but because they had nowhere else to go. Everyone lived paycheck to paycheck, and the houses, if you could even call them that, were mostly run down, old, and barely held together. Peeling paint, sagging porches, broken fences. Our little patch of the world was stuck in a permanent state of decay. Even the businesses in town couldn't survive more than a year or two. It was common to see grand openings turn into going out of business signs within months. Eventually, people just stopped trying. As kids, we found our own fun in places adults had long given up on. Abandoned houses, broken down stores, old warehouses. We turned them into playgrounds. We knew it wasn't safe, but it was the only kind of adventure we could afford. Everyone did it. I'm sure the police knew, but they never intervened. Maybe they thought it was harmless, or maybe they just didn't care. But there was one place different from the others. An old elementary school on the edge of town. It shut down when I was in first grade, something about budget cuts, lack of students, structural issues, I don't know. All I knew was that one day it closed, and it never reopened. Unlike other abandoned buildings, no one repurposed it. No one tore it down. It just sat there year after year, like a rotting corpse in the woods. Even when it was active, the place had a weird vibe. It was built far from the rest of the town, buried deep in the trees, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. It never felt like a school. It felt like a place kids were sent to disappear. As I got older, the urge to explore that school grew stronger. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe something darker pulled me in. Whatever it was, one night I finally decided to go back. I didn't go alone. My friend Ryan, who lived a few blocks away, agreed to go with me. We'd explored plenty of places before. Abandoned diners, empty trailers, even a collapsed church. But this felt different. This was personal. We didn't have cars, so we walked. For miles in the cold, our breath fogging the air, flashlights in our pockets, backpacks loaded with snacks and water. It was Saturday night. No one knew where we were. When we finally reached the fence, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The moonlight filtered through the tall trees, casting twisted shadows on the cracked pavement. The fence was still there, but part of it had collapsed inward, probably from years of weather and rust. We stepped through and made our way toward the building. Even in its prime, the school had looked like a relic from a horror movie. Gray bricks stained with mold, windows too small for a place meant for children, and vines climbing its walls like veins. Now, with years of rot added to the mix, it looked even worse. We found a window on the side of the building that had already been shattered, probably by other kids over the years. I climbed in first, crunching glass beneath my boots, followed by Ryan. We stood still for a moment, flashlights off, just listening. The building was making this eerie, hollow, creaking noise, like it was breathing slowly. We couldn't hear anyone else inside, just the occasional drip of water and the groan of decaying wood. We switched on our flashlights and began to walk. The hallways were coated in dust and scattered debris. Lockers were rusted shut or hung open like broken jaws. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it stupid, some of it disturbing. "Help Me" was spray-painted in red above one door. "They Never Left" was scrawled in black across another. Most of the rooms we passed were empty, just broken chairs, ruined desks, and scattered papers. It was surreal seeing the place again. I recognized some of the murals we painted as kids, now faded and torn. The smell of rot and mildew was thick in the air. We had just passed our third classroom when it happened. A loud, sudden thud echoed from deep within the building. We froze. The sound wasn't natural. It wasn't a creak or a drip. It was sharp, heavy, like something falling or being thrown. Ryan turned to me, whispering, "Probably the building settling, or maybe an animal." But he didn't sound confident. We kept moving, slower now, flashlights lowered but still on. The deeper into the school we went, the stranger things became. One hallway was blocked entirely by a mess of chairs and desks piled up like a barricade. We had to climb over and push them aside just to get through. That's when we found the room. It was the second one on the left in the new hallway. The first door was jammed shut, but the second creaked open easily. Inside, our lights flicked across the room, and I stopped cold. Clothes, hanging from the ceiling, not on hooks, not on racks, hanging like bodies, shirts, pants, even shoes suspended by ropes and wire. Some were children's clothing, torn, stained. Ryan didn't say a word. I stepped further in, completely unsettled. Why would anyone hang clothes like this? It wasn't art. It wasn't vandalism. It felt ritualistic. That's when I noticed something else. Silence. Ryan hadn't followed me into the room. I turned to look at him, confused, and as my flashlight swept across the far end of the room, I saw it. A figure, standing perfectly still in the shadows. Naked, almost male. Pale skin, bruised and torn, barely illuminated. He was holding something. At first, I thought it was a piece of metal or wood. But no, it was a knife. A long, jagged blade, rusted and dark. The man's eyes didn't blink. They just stared, wide and wild, like he hadn't seen daylight in years. Ryan finally grabbed my arm, yanking me back. I stumbled into the hallway, heart racing, trying to process what I had seen. Then came the sound, a metallic clang, something thrown hard at the door, and then a scream. It wasn't a normal scream. It wasn't human. It sounded like a dying animal, twisted and gurgling and furious. We ran, faster than we'd ever run before. Down the hallway, over the barricade of chairs, past the classrooms, out the window. We didn't stop until we were blocks away from the school, lungs burning, hearts pounding. We didn't speak for a long time. Eventually, we pieced things together. The man, whoever he was, wasn't just squatting there. He lived there, or rather existed there, survived there. We don't know how long. Maybe since the school closed. Maybe longer. And that knife, he didn't just drop it. He threw it at us. Had we walked in a little further, had we stayed a second longer, we might have never left. No one believed us when we told the story. They thought we made it up or exaggerated it. But we knew what we saw. We both saw him. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see him, standing there half naked, in that room filled with hanging clothes, staring, waiting. I had recently moved into a new house just outside the city. Life in the city had become too chaotic. Sirens blaring at all hours, neighbors yelling through thin apartment walls, constant traffic. I wanted peace, quiet, and distance. I wanted space to breathe. So, I found a rental home tucked away on the edge of a rural town. The listing described it as a secluded forestside property. And it was exactly that. The house itself was nearly perfect. It had been recently renovated, modern kitchen, hardwood floors, clean paint, good plumbing. The landlord, a middle-aged man named Henry, seemed friendly and honest. He said he had lived there himself for several years before deciding to rent it out and move closer to family. What really sold me, though, was the land. Acres of untouched forest surrounded the house. Tall, thick trees grew densely enough that you couldn't see the roads, nor any neighboring homes, if there even were any. It felt like being alone in the world, and to me that felt like freedom. My first week there passed uneventfully. I worked long hours remotely and rarely left the house. But that Friday I managed to finish early. The golden hour light filtered through the trees outside, and the air was cool, crisp, and quiet. I figured it was time to explore. Behind the house there was a narrow trail, barely noticeable unless you looked closely. It wound between the trees, swallowed in parts by moss and fallen branches. I followed it casually, breathing in the earthy scent of pine and decaying leaves. At first, it was just a forest like any other. Birds chirped. A squirrel darted past. Everything was serene. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow or maybe a trick of the light. But no. Far off between the trees was a structure. It wasn't a modern building. Nothing like the sleek design of the home I'd rented. This place looked forgotten. Rotting wood, sagging roof. Definitely not a house someone had lived in recently. I could only see part of it through the trees, and I wasn't really in the mood for an impromptu adventure, so I shrugged it off and went back inside. But that night, I kept thinking about it. Curiosity got the better of me. Around 9 p.m., I texted my landlord. "Hey Henry, quick question. There's an old structure in the woods behind the house. Do you know what that is?" I stared at my phone for a while, but eventually forgot about it and went to bed. The next day, Saturday, I came home from running errands around 4 p.m. I checked my phone, still no response. I found it odd. Henry had always responded quickly before. Maybe he didn't know what I was talking about? That idea actually made me nervous. If he didn't know about it, what was it doing there? I went back into the woods. This time, I pushed farther in. The forest felt different now. Quieter, heavier, as though it was watching me. After about 5 minutes of walking, I saw the structure again. It was a small house, maybe a cabin. 2 stories tall but very narrow. I circled around it, inspecting it from a distance. The wood was gray with rot. Vines climbed the walls. One window on the first floor was boarded up, and the others were so dirty I couldn't see inside. Around the back, I found a crooked door hanging from its hinges. I didn't want to go in, but I couldn't stand not knowing. I walked up the back porch, which creaked with every step. I knocked gently on the wall. Silence. No animals, no rustling, no response. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me like a punch to the face. Rotting, moldy, like meat left in a crawl space during a hot summer. I gagged but forced myself to step inside. The interior was mostly empty. Dust blanketed the floor. In the middle of the room was a single, decaying wooden table. The walls were peeling. 2 windows, both boarded up. Darkness ruled the place. To the left was another room, completely empty except for a staircase. I shined my phone's flashlight up the stairs and froze. There was no second floor, at least not one that made any architectural sense. The staircase ended at a flat wooden wall. No door, no landing, just a wall where the second story should have begun. I stepped closer, confused, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I heard it, breathing, soft, slow, rhythmic, on the other side of the wall at the top of the stairs. My blood went cold. It wasn't mine. It wasn't an animal. It was someone. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. But the moment I moved, I heard it again. Soft, deliberate footsteps from above. But how? I turned and ran, sprinting out of the house, nearly tripping on the porch steps, crashing through branches on my way back to the main house. I slammed the door, locked every window, and stood in my living room with the lights off, heart pounding in my throat. No one followed me. No one appeared outside. I waited. Still no message from Henry. I debated calling the police. What would I even tell them? That I found an impossible staircase in a house I didn't own? An hour later, I gave in and made the call. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. They didn't seem all that concerned, though they agreed to check it out. I led them through the trees back to the old house. They searched the downstairs first. Nothing unusual. Then they climbed the stairs. And that's when the horror really began. "There's no wall here," one of them said. I looked up. Sure enough, where I had seen a blank wall the day before, now there was an open doorway leading to a dusty upstairs room. Empty. No furniture. No signs of recent activity. I asked them if they were sure. They looked at me like I was crazy. "You probably just saw shadows," one officer said. "But I know what I saw." After they left, I started to unravel. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind tapping the windows made my skin crawl. I stayed inside, curtains drawn, lights on. I checked my phone repeatedly. Still no word from Henry. Days passed, then weeks. I messaged him again and again about rent, about the property, about the house in the woods. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished. One night, around 3 a.m., I heard something knock on my back door. 3 times. I peeked through the curtain. No one was there. The next morning, I packed some clothes and drove to a hotel. I stayed there for 3 days, telling myself I needed to calm down, that it was all in my head. On the 4th day, I returned to get more of my things. When I walked into the living room, I saw muddy footprints on the floor. They led from the back door to the hallway and up the stairs, but I had locked the door. I always locked the door. I didn't wait any longer. I left that day and never returned. I sent Henry one last message. I'm breaking the lease. I'm leaving. Please don't contact me. I never heard from him again. The weirdest part? When I tried to report the house and the strange events to the town records office, they told me that only one house was ever registered on that land. Mine. The forest had no other structures. No abandoned cabin. No second house. Just trees. I moved across the country a month later. I don't go near forests anymore. And sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, I still hear that breathing, soft and steady, behind a wall that isn't there. I had recently moved into a new house just outside the city. Life in the city had become too chaotic. Sirens blaring at all hours, neighbors yelling through thin apartment walls, constant traffic. I wanted peace, quiet, and distance. I wanted space to breathe. So, I found a rental home tucked away on the edge of a rural town. The listing described it as a secluded forestside property. And it was exactly that. The house itself was nearly perfect. It had been recently renovated, modern kitchen, hardwood floors, clean paint, good plumbing. The landlord, a middle-aged man named Henry, seemed friendly and honest. He said he had lived there himself for several years before deciding to rent it out and move closer to family. What really sold me, though, was the land. Acres of untouched forest surrounded the house. Tall, thick trees grew densely enough that you couldn't see the roads, nor any neighboring homes, if there even were any. It felt like being alone in the world, and to me that felt like freedom. My first week there passed uneventfully. I worked long hours remotely and rarely left the house. But that Friday I managed to finish early. The golden hour light filtered through the trees outside, and the air was cool, crisp, and quiet. I figured it was time to explore. Behind the house there was a narrow trail, barely noticeable unless you looked closely. It wound between the trees, swallowed in parts by moss and fallen branches. I followed it casually, breathing in the earthy scent of pine and decaying leaves. At first, it was just a forest like any other. Birds chirped. A squirrel darted past. Everything was serene. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow or maybe a trick of the light. But no. Far off between the trees was a structure. It wasn't a modern building. Nothing like the sleek design of the home I'd rented. This place looked forgotten. Rotting wood, sagging roof. Definitely not a house someone had lived in recently. I could only see part of it through the trees, and I wasn't really in the mood for an impromptu adventure, so I shrugged it off and went back inside. But that night, I kept thinking about it. Curiosity got the better of me. Around 9 p.m., I texted my landlord. "Hey Henry, quick question. There's an old structure in the woods behind the house. Do you know what that is?" I stared at my phone for a while, but eventually forgot about it and went to bed. The next day, Saturday, I came home from running errands around 4 p.m. I checked my phone, still no response. I found it odd. Henry had always responded quickly before. Maybe he didn't know what I was talking about? That idea actually made me nervous. If he didn't know about it, what was it doing there? I went back into the woods. This time, I pushed farther in. The forest felt different now, quieter, heavier, as though it was watching me. After about 5 minutes of walking, I saw the structure again. It was a small house, maybe a cabin. 2 stories tall but very narrow. I circled around it, inspecting it from a distance. The wood was gray with rot. Vines climbed the walls. One window on the first floor was boarded up, and the others were so dirty I couldn't see inside. Around the back, I found a crooked door hanging from its hinges. I didn't want to go in, but I couldn't stand not knowing. I walked up the back porch, which creaked with every step. I knocked gently on the wall. Silence. No animals, no rustling, no response. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me like a punch to the face. Rotting, moldy, like meat left in a crawl space during a hot summer. I gagged but forced myself to step inside. The interior was mostly empty. Dust blanketed the floor. In the middle of the room was a single, decaying wooden table. The walls were peeling. 2 windows, both boarded up. Darkness ruled the place. To the left was another room, completely empty except for a staircase. I shined my phone's flashlight up the stairs and froze. There was no second floor, at least not one that made any architectural sense. The staircase ended at a flat wooden wall. No door, no landing, just a wall where the second story should have begun. I stepped closer, confused, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I heard it, breathing, soft, slow, rhythmic, on the other side of the wall at the top of the stairs. My blood went cold. It wasn't mine. It wasn't an animal. It was someone. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. But the moment I moved, I heard it again. Soft, deliberate footsteps from above. But how? I turned and ran, sprinting out of the house, nearly tripping on the porch steps, crashing through branches on my way back to the main house. I slammed the door, locked every window, and stood in my living room with the lights off, heart pounding in my throat. No one followed me. No one appeared outside. I waited. Still no message from Henry. I debated calling the police. What would I even tell them? That I found an impossible staircase in a house I didn't own? An hour later, I gave in and made the call. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. They didn't seem all that concerned, though they agreed to check it out. I led them through the trees back to the old house. They searched the downstairs first. Nothing unusual. Then they climbed the stairs. And that's when the horror really began. "There's no wall here," one of them said. I looked up. Sure enough, where I had seen a blank wall the day before, now there was an open doorway leading to a dusty upstairs room. Empty. No furniture. No signs of recent activity. I asked them if they were sure. They looked at me like I was crazy. "You probably just saw shadows," one officer said. "But I know what I saw." After they left, I started to unravel. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind tapping the windows made my skin crawl. I stayed inside, curtains drawn, lights on. I checked my phone repeatedly. There's a foreign, mountainous, and heavily forested region near the US-Canada border that I often explore. Hiking has always been my escape from the world. I live not too far from that border, and sometimes I'll take my gear and disappear into the woods for days at a time. No plan, no specific destination, just a trail, a backpack, and the thrill of the unknown. That unpredictability is what I live for, but I'm not reckless. I always carry multiple methods of navigation, GPS, compass, maps, and let someone know I'll be off the grid for a while. You never know what could happen out there. Wild animals, sudden weather changes, even getting lost. Being prepared is non-negotiable. It was early summer this year, just as the snow had melted and the ground was firm enough to walk without sinking in. I decided to take a trail I hadn't seen before, something barely visible, as if the forest itself wanted to reclaim it. It intersected with another path I had taken weeks earlier, and I figured, why not see where it leads? The first few miles were quiet. No birds chirping, no rustling of leaves from small animals. Just the sound of my own boots crunching against dead twigs and dry leaves. Felt unusually still. The kind of stillness that makes your skin prickle and your instincts go on high alert. I shrugged it off at first. Forests have moods just like people. About 2 hours in, the faint trail became even harder to follow. It weaved in and out of dense foliage, sometimes disappearing completely. That's when I began noticing something strange. Shoe prints. Not many, and definitely not in a clear, linear path. Some crossed the trail. Some followed it for a few feet, then veered off into the woods. They were erratic, disorganized, like someone was lost or hiding. I kept going. Another hour passed, and the trail began to shift. It became more defined. The forest opened slightly, and I came across a wide, muddy stretch littered with dozens of shoe prints. This wasn't just some lost hiker. This area was used frequently. But by who? That's when I saw it. Just beyond the curve in the trail, partially obscured by branches and thick underbrush, was a cabin. Weathered, old, hidden deep within the forest, far from any marked trails. I paused, trying to process what I was seeing. The cabin didn't look abandoned, not from afar. Someone had to be living there, right? The shoe prints suggested as much. Maybe a hermit or someone going off-grid. Not uncommon out here. But as I got closer, something didn't sit right. The cabin was in terrible shape. The wooden door hung limply from one hinge, creaking faintly in the breeze. The bottom edges of the cabin were rotted, sinking into the earth like the forest was trying to swallow it whole. Vines had started creeping up the sides, and some of the roof shingles had collapsed inward. Yet the shoe prints, they were fresh. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body was screaming for me to turn around, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped into the small clearing surrounding the cabin. The air felt colder here, oppressive, like the forest had exhaled something ancient and foul. The stench hit me the moment I stepped onto the porch. It was a foul, rancid odor, like decay and mildew soaked in stagnant water. I covered my nose with my sleeve and peeked inside. The cabin was dark, despite the daylight. What little sunlight broke through the holes in the roof only illuminated dust particles swirling in the thick, stale air. The floor was warped and cracked, with roots breaking through in places. It looked like the forest was literally growing inside. There were signs that animals had nested here, droppings, tufts of fur, claw marks on the walls, but no signs of human life. No furniture, no tools, no lanterns. Just empty space and the overwhelming sense that something terrible had happened here. I stepped inside, just past the threshold, when something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned and saw him, a man, standing just beyond the tree line, pale, motionless, watching me. He was too far to make out clearly, but I could tell he wasn't dressed for hiking. His clothes were tattered, dirty, his posture rigid, arms at his sides. His presence sent a cold shiver down my spine. Then he moved, not toward me but away, fast, vanishing into the trees like he was never there at all. Panic surged through me. I bolted from the cabin, adrenaline overriding every rational thought. I ran without direction, just moving away from that place, dodging branches and leaping over roots until my legs burned and my lungs screamed for air. Eventually, I stopped. I had no idea how far I'd gone or if I was even on the trail anymore. I forced myself to calm down and navigate my way back to the cabin's general area, only from a distance, just enough to find my way home. When I got back, I called it in. I reported the cabin, the man, and the bizarre shoe prints to local authorities. I didn't expect them to do much, but to my surprise, they took it seriously. Maybe because I described it as a potential missing person or trespassing case. Maybe they knew something I didn't. It took them 4 days to assemble a small search party. I went with them to guide the way, but when we arrived, the cabin was gone. In its place was a blackened patch of earth, ashes, charred timber. It had burned to the ground completely. There were no footprints, no signs of wildlife, no trace of the man I saw, just the faint smell of burnt wood and something else underneath it, something chemical, artificial. They told me it must have been struck by lightning, said it was old and probably unstable. But I knew better. It hadn't rained in over a week before the fire. Someone burned that cabin. Someone was covering something up. And I think I interrupted them before they were ready. I've thought about that moment every day since. About the way the man moved. About the wild, directionless footprints. About the stench inside that cabin. Like something had died long ago. But it's not just that. Some nights, when I lie awake in my cabin near the same woods, I swear I see movement in the trees. A flicker of pale skin between the trunks. A figure standing perfectly still, just at the edge of the forest, watching. And then it's gone. I stopped hiking alone after that. I sold the property 2 months later. But no matter how far I move, I feel like something followed me out of those woods. Something that doesn't want to be found. Something that's still watching, waiting in case I tell too much. If you're listening to this, just know. Some trails were never meant to be followed. And some cabins were never meant to be found. I'm an officer with our local police department. Our shifts are notoriously unpredictable, rotating constantly, forcing us to work long hours on wildly different schedules each week. 1 week it could be 10 to 12 hours overnight, followed by an early morning shift, then back to overnight again. It's exhausting and grueling, and on this particular night, I was scheduled for a 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. shift. The late night hours blur into one another, a haze of flickering streetlights and distant, echoing sirens. The fatigue settles deep into your bones, a constant reminder that you're far from the safety and warmth of home. You learn to push through it, to stay alert despite the exhaustion. But there are nights when it feels like the darkness presses in a little too close. That night, while I was at the station completing routine paperwork, the dispatcher buzzed me with a call that seemed routine at first. A group of teenagers trespassing on private property. Not just any property, though. This was the old hospital on the outskirts of town. The hospital had been abandoned for over a decade. The building was a decaying relic, crumbling slowly under years of neglect. Its windows were shattered, the paint peeled away like scabs revealing rotten wood beneath. Creeping ivy climbed the sides, and the metal gates had long since rusted through, giving way to graffiti-covered walls and broken glass littering the ground. It was a notorious hangout spot for local kids and vandals. Over the years, the entire department had dealt with trespassing, minor vandalism, and sometimes more serious illegal activities there. The place was infamous among us, whispered about like an urban legend. A place kids dared each other to visit, but never for long. I had been dispatched there 3 times before, and I knew the drill. Usually, I'd find a small group of friends smoking or messing around, and I'd either escort them off the property or watch them bolt when they saw me coming. The whole thing was tiring and mundane, a distraction from the real work of policing. At that point, I was bone tired, the kind of tired that wraps around you like a thick fog, dulling your senses. I didn't care about arrests or charges. All I wanted was for them to leave, so I could get back to the station and maybe catch some sleep before the next shift. So, I drove out there, expecting a quick and straightforward call. The drive to the hospital took me past cracked street lamps and overgrown backyards. The deeper I got into the outskirts, the quieter it became. Even the usual hum of distant traffic faded away, replaced by the occasional rustle of wind through dead leaves and the faint howl of a stray dog somewhere far off. When I arrived, the place was shrouded in darkness except for a single flashlight beam darting erratically across the second-story windows. It moved rapidly, almost like someone was sprinting through the long, empty hallway inside. I pulled my patrol car up quietly and stepped out, my own flashlight in hand. The air was thick and cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your breath visible in short, sharp bursts. I called out firmly, "Police! Everyone come out now!" Of course, no one answered. The old hospital swallowed my voice whole. The silence was so heavy it pressed in on me, setting every nerve on edge. My footsteps echoed as I approached the entrance, the heavy wooden doors groaning as I pushed them open. Inside, the stale air was thick with dust and the faint, sickly sweet smell of mold. I stayed near the entrance for a moment, listening for any sounds, footsteps, voices, the shuffle of movement. But nothing came. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak from the building settling. The silence was broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere deep inside, and the distant fluttering of torn curtains hanging limp from broken windows. It was enough to wake me up, to get my nerves jangling. My heart pounded in my chest, and instinctively, my right hand hovered near my holster. I couldn't shake the nagging thought that this could be a trap. Maybe someone was waiting to ambush me, hiding in the shadows. I took a deep breath and moved inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the stale air. The hallway was long, with peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles underfoot. Rusted metal beds lay abandoned along the walls, and broken medical equipment was scattered about like the remnants of some forgotten nightmare. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step echoing like a gunshot. The walls on either side were smeared with graffiti, some of it indecipherable symbols that made my skin crawl. The air grew colder as I ascended, a chilling draft that whispered through the broken windows. Just as I reached the second-floor landing, a loud thud reverberated through the building, like someone had slammed into a wall. The noise was unmistakable, and definitely from somewhere along the upper hallway. I stepped into the dim corridor and swung my flashlight in a wide arc, searching for movement. But the hallway was empty. No shadow, no shape, no sign of life. I shouted again, this time with a sharper edge to my voice. "I'm a police officer. Show yourself now." Still no response. The only sound was the faint creaking and groaning of the old hospital structure. I advanced cautiously, checking each door with the beam of my light. Most rooms were empty shells, filled with rusty hospital beds and layers of graffiti sprayed on the walls. At the far end of the hallway, a door stood closed. I stopped, feeling a cold draft seep from its edges. I called out one last time before pushing it open. The room was empty, but the evidence inside told a different story. Cigarette butts littered the floor, some still smoldering faintly, smoke curling upward like ghostly fingers. Whoever had been here had left in a rush. I turned to close the door behind me, and suddenly it slammed shut with a violent bang. Then, something heavy slammed against it from the other side, followed by hurried footsteps retreating down the hallway. My adrenaline kicked in. I shoved the door with all my strength, forcing it open just wide enough to slip through. On the other side, I saw a large hospital bed pressed against the door, clearly used to block it. Whoever was there was long gone. Backup arrived soon after, and we searched the entire building thoroughly. We checked with the two teenagers who'd called the initial report. They were shaken, but neither could explain what had happened. The strange thing was, only one set of footsteps had been heard on the second floor. Only one flashlight beam had been visible. The burning cigarettes confirmed the intruders had fled suddenly. But why had one of them seemingly stayed behind, if they fled in panic? Then, just the next morning, reports came in from two distraught mothers, each reporting a missing teenage son, the very same boys who had been at the hospital the night before. We investigated for days, then weeks, then months. No trace of the boys ever surfaced. 6 years have passed, And still, they remain missing, vanished without a trace. Sometimes I wonder if I should have pushed harder that night. Maybe if I'd stayed longer or called for more backup sooner, things might have turned out differently. But there's also a part of me that fears what I might have found if I had. What happened that night in the abandoned hospital? Was the figure in the second floor hallway one of the missing boys? Or something else entirely? The current most accepted theory is that whoever or whatever I encountered was not one of the teens, but something else haunting those desolate halls. Something dark, restless, and unwilling to let anyone leave. There are stories among officers about strange sounds and shadows seen around that hospital. Some swear they've heard whispering voices carried on the wind. Others talk about unexplained cold spots or fleeting glimpses of figures in broken windows. But nothing concrete has ever been proven. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself driving past that hospital. The broken windows stare back like empty eye sockets. The flicker of a single light sometimes shines from within, even though no one should be there. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I see a figure standing in the second-story window watching, a reminder that some places are better left forgotten. I live in a tiny countryside town, so small that the population barely reaches a few thousand. The nearest city is hours away, a distant world of lights and noise that feels utterly foreign to us. Around here, everyone knows everyone. With so few people, privacy is almost non-existent, and secrets rarely survive the weight of whispered gossip. Every family, every face, every misstep or scandal eventually becomes common knowledge. It's like living inside a bubble where the air is thick with stories and the past never really fades. When I was in high school, I had a best friend named Chris. We spent almost every day together, exploring the quiet streets, wandering the woods, or just sitting around talking about nothing and everything. Chris was the kind of person who loved adventure. He thrived on the thrill of the unknown. I was more cautious, the kind to stay on the sidelines, but I couldn't deny that a small part of me was always curious. And that curiosity, that creeping itch, was what led us to the farmhouse. It was mid-fall, when the air starts to turn crisp and the days grow shorter. The town was buzzing with stories about an old, empty farmhouse on the edge of the town limits. Everyone had heard about it, though no one had dared go inside. The place had been abandoned for years, maybe 5 or more, left to rot beneath creeping vines and the harsh weather. Supposedly, the owners had just left one day, never to return, leaving behind an eerie shell that whispered secrets only the wind could understand. Rumors about that farmhouse spread like wildfire through the school hallways and town diners. Some said it was haunted. Others claimed to have heard strange noises or seen ghostly figures in the windows at night. It became a dare, a challenge for the bravest or most foolish kids to prove they weren't scared. And Chris, as expected, was more than ready. One weekend night, around 11 p.m., Chris brought it up casually, his eyes shining with excitement. "Let's check it out," he said, grinning. "I want to see what's really inside that place." I hesitated. I wasn't the type to sneak off and explore creepy abandoned houses, but there was something magnetic about the unknown. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was curiosity, but I found myself agreeing. We grabbed a couple of flashlights, old ones that barely worked, and got into Chris's beat-up car. We drove toward the outskirts of town, following the rough directions we'd heard from other kids. The farmhouse was visible from the main road, a dark silhouette swallowed by shadows. Its wooden panels were rotting, the roof sagging, the entire structure sagging like it was about to collapse. Finding the driveway was impossible. Over the years, thick weeds and tall grass had swallowed it whole, erasing any clear path. We parked on the shoulder and stepped out into the cold, damp night. It was nearly 1 a.m. The moon was full, casting a pale glow over the field. The wind whispered softly through the grass, and every step forward felt heavier, like the night was pulling us deeper into a trap. As we walked across the uneven terrain, a strange silence settled around us. The usual sounds of crickets or distant owls faded until all we could hear was our own breathing and the crunch of dead leaves beneath our feet. The farmhouse yard was overrun with weeds, the wild vines crawling up the walls like grasping fingers. The air smelled stale, thick with dust and decay. The front door was missing, just an empty frame that yawned like a mouth waiting to swallow us whole. Chris led the way inside, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. The floorboards creaked under our feet, and the walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, faded and stained by years of neglect. Trash littered the rooms. Broken glass, rusted cans, old newspapers yellowed with age. It looked like the house had been frozen in time, abandoned suddenly with no explanation. We explored the ground floor for a few minutes, moving from the living room to the kitchen, the chill in the air seeping into my bones. There was a lingering heaviness here, like the house itself was mourning something long lost. After we'd seen all there was to see on the first floor, we made our way up the narrow staircase. Upstairs was darker, almost pitch black. Unlike the ground floor, there seemed to be no windows, or at least none that let in moonlight. We flicked on our flashlights and scanned the hallway. 2 doors stood opposite each other, one on the left, one on the right. Chris moved toward the left door, but it was locked tight. He fiddled with the old knob, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. I turned to the door on the right. It was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, revealing a small, empty room. The walls were damp, with mold crawling across the ceiling like sinister shadows. Aside from the musty smell and the peeling paint, there was nothing here except a single window. The window was boarded up with slabs of weathered wood, nailed haphazardly in place. I crouched down, curiosity overcoming my unease. Why would someone block an upstairs window like this? I peered through a narrow gap between 2 boards, hoping to see the outside world. What I saw made my heart stop. The window overlooked the field we had crossed, the moonlit grass shimmering in the faint light. But there was a figure, a man, walking slowly toward the farmhouse, his silhouette dark against the glowing field. He wasn't just a passerby or another curious kid. There was something wrong about him, something cold, deliberate. I stepped back from the window and whispered urgently to Chris, "There's someone coming. Someone's here." My voice trembled. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears, loud enough that I thought it would give us away. Chris moved quickly to the window, shining his flashlight out, but all we could see was the shadowy outline of the man moving closer. Suddenly, we heard footsteps, not from outside, but from inside the house, downstairs. Heavy, slow, deliberate steps that echoed through the wooden floorboards. We froze, standing in the middle of the empty room, terrified to move. The footsteps grew louder as they climbed the stairs, approaching. Then, a large figure appeared in the hallway, just a few feet from us. He was facing away, standing in the dark, unlocking the door on the left side of the hall. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't turn around. But as the door swung open, I locked eyes with another man, standing silently in the room beyond. His gaze was cold, unreadable. We broke eye contact when the door shut behind them. Through the faint crack, we could hear their whispered voices, low and urgent, words we couldn't make out. Chris and I knew we couldn't stay. We bolted into the hallway and sprinted down the stairs. Behind us, the door we just left swung open with a crash, footsteps pounding after us. We didn't look back. We ran across the field, our legs burning, breath ragged in the cold air. Only when we reached the car did we stop, slamming the doors shut and fumbling with the keys. The drive home was silent. Neither of us said a word, both too shaken to speak. Our minds raced with questions. Who were those men? What were they doing in that house? And why were they so secretive? We never called the police. Fear of getting caught trespassing and the unsettling nature of what we saw kept us silent. We knew we had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple dare. A month later, the farmhouse was bought and torn down, demolished without explanation. The mystery buried under rubble and dirt. Whatever secrets it held were lost, or perhaps hidden in the shadows where no one dared to look. Even now, thinking back to that night sends chills down my spine. That house, those men, they felt like ghosts of something dark and dangerous, and maybe it was better that way, because some places are meant to stay forgotten. I needed a break. From work, from people, from the constant buzzing of a life that never let me breathe. So I decided to take a few days off and spend them alone, camping deep in the woods. Not just any woods, but a remote forest a few hours from the small town where I lived. It was the kind of place where cell service died and silence grew louder than anything I'd heard in months. That's what I was looking for. Silence, solitude, and something raw. The hike in took about 4 hours. I followed an established trail, though even it was quiet and overgrown. It was already dusk by the time I reached the end, a small clearing beside a crooked brook with a flat patch perfect for a tent. I set up camp, built a fire, and listened as the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal life. Felt wild, untamed. But beneath the natural calm, something about the air felt off, heavier than it should have been, like the woods were watching. The first night passed without incident. I barely slept, but I chalked that up to being away from civilization. My ears caught every rustle, every distant owl, every shift of wind. It was probably nothing. Probably. The next morning was cool and still. The sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. With no one around for miles and no real schedule to follow, I decided to explore. That's when I noticed it. A narrow path leading out from the edge of the clearing, half swallowed by brush and time. It wasn't marked on any of the trail maps I'd studied, and judging by how the forest had begun reclaiming it, it hadn't been used in years. Still, something pulled me toward it. Maybe it was boredom, maybe curiosity, maybe something else. I packed a small bag with food, water, and a flashlight, just in case, and set out. The trail was tight, thorny branches clawing at my arms as I walked. Every step felt like pushing deeper into something untouched, forgotten. For nearly 2 hours I moved through increasingly dense growth. No signs of life, no footprints, no wrappers, no carvings in trees. It was silent, unnaturally so. The further I went, the more the sounds of the forest seemed to vanish. Even the birds avoided this place. Then I saw it. A house, or what used to be one. It stood like a skeleton in the woods, swallowed by vines and moss. A small cabin, maybe 1 story, sunken into the earth like it had tried to disappear and failed. The wood siding was gray and splintered, the windows shattered or hanging by threads. The front door swung slightly on rusted hinges, creaking ever so gently in the breeze, or what I thought was a breeze, though I couldn't feel any wind. Something in my gut told me to leave, but my feet didn't listen. I approached slowly, scanning the area. No tire marks, no broken branches, no sign that anyone had been there in decades. It was abandoned, forgotten, like a memory someone tried hard to erase. The scent hit me first. Mildew, rot, and something else. Something metallic like rusted iron and something spoiled. I stepped onto the porch, boards groaning under my weight, and looked through the open door. Inside it was empty, mostly. Dust covered the floor in thick, undisturbed layers. Cobwebs danced from every corner. The walls were bare wood, stained with time and rot. I walked inside, boots crunching over debris. There were a few broken chairs, an overturned table, and what looked like the rusted remains of an old stove. I moved through the rooms slowly, cautiously, but found nothing of interest until I reached the end of the hallway. There, at the very back of the cabin, was a closed wooden door. Unlike the others, this one wasn't hanging open or rotted at the hinges. Stood firm, intact, and locked. But not just any lock. A bright silver padlock held it shut. Clean, unblemished, completely out of place in the decaying ruin. It shone faintly in the dim light filtering through the broken window behind me. I reached out instinctively, but stopped just short of touching it. The air around the door was wrong. Colder, heavier. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and thunderous, and my skin prickled as if touched by static. Why was this door locked? Who had placed such a pristine padlock here? What was behind it? I stood there for what felt like minutes, paralyzed by the possibilities. Then something deeper inside, fear, instinct, took over. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I turned and left the house in a hurry, not even bothering to look back. But as I stepped onto the trail again, just as my boots hit the first stretch of dirt, I heard it. A single footstep behind me on the wooden floor of the cabin. I spun around. Nothing. The door still hung open. The hallway empty. I stared for a long time before turning away again, heart racing. I walked faster this time, trying to ignore the goosebumps crawling across my skin. But I wasn't alone. For the entire 2-hour hike back to camp, I heard them, footsteps in the distance. Always just far enough behind to stay hidden, but close enough that I couldn't pretend it was my imagination. They matched my pace, stopped when I stopped. The trees were too thick to see anything beyond 10 feet, and the silence between steps was suffocating. When I finally returned to camp, I lit a fire immediately and sat with my back to a tree, scanning the woods. The sun began to dip beneath the horizon, and the shadows stretched long and black. By nightfall, the footsteps started again. Not close, but not far either. I couldn't see anyone, but they could see me. Every 10 to 15 minutes, I'd hear another small line of footsteps, shifting, waiting, circling. It wasn't a deer or a bear. It was deliberate, human, and patient. I kept the fire burning high, throwing as much wood into it as I could. I told myself that fire would keep them away. I didn't know what else to do. Eventually, I had to sleep, or at least try. I crawled into the tent, leaving the fire still crackling. I laid with a knife gripped tight in one hand and my flashlight in the other. But sleep never really came. Every snapping twig, every breeze, every movement in the dark had my eyes wide open. Sometime around 3 a.m., I heard the unmistakable crunch of leaves just outside the tent. Then silence. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The zipper of the tent stayed shut, but the fear inside me was tearing its way out. I stayed like that until the sky began to lighten, the sounds of birds returning like a distant lifeline. When morning came, I packed everything in less than 10 minutes and hiked out. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't rest. I just walked. I don't know what was behind that door. I don't know who or what followed me. But I do know this. The padlock didn't match the house. It was new, maintained, used, and that means someone, somewhere, keeps returning. I've never gone back. I've never even tried to find that trail again. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I still hear footsteps behind me, echoes in the distance, like someone never stopped following. And I still think about that locked door, not what it was hiding, but who or what it was keeping in.